Macy's has all of your Grill Master essentials for Father's Day. Stop by to get our hand-trimmed chicken breast and certified Angus beef patties that are ready to grill, so Dad can have his favorite dinner. Make sure to browse our bakery to find the perfect no-work Father's Day treat with our decadent peanut butter bars or famous donuts. Right now, you can get boneless beef ribeye steaks for $12.99 per pound at Macy's. Shop these Father's Day essentials in-store or online at Macys.com through June 18th. Macy's, happy shopping!
Welcome to the Intrazone, a show about the SharePoint Intelligent Intranet. I'm your host, Mark Cashman. Each week I'll have a special co-host from inside the Microsoft SharePoint team to give you the most comprehensive analysis of what SharePoint can do for you. And per topic, we'll try to pull in the best subject matter expert to walk through everything that we have to talk about that particular topic. Today, my co-host is Chris McNulty, Senior Product Manager for SharePoint and Office 365.
Thanks, Mark. Today in our guest segments, we'll be talking with Dan Costanero and Mike Morton from the Office Online Engineering team, and Jason Himmelstein from Rackspace.
It's going to be a pretty packed show as we go through guest topics. We're going to cover a whole bunch of things. But I just want to say, Chris, you're looking pretty good. Have you been on a desktop diet for quite some time?
I've been trying that, and we've been talking about the desktop diet, and today we'll be talking about what it's like to go desktop free. How do we live solely inside mobile technologies and interact with SharePoint and the rest of Office 365?
I love it. So we'll dive into that as a topic. We always are open for people's perspectives and feedback, and we don't want to be hidden behind a rock. We want to be right there, especially if we're going to have a desktop diet. We're looking good.
Looking good.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. So you've been traveling, you're back now, ready to hit the pavement running?
Hit the pavement running.
Starting off the episode, here are some interesting news and announcements coming from the SharePoint and OneDrive product groups.
There were a ton of announcements at SharePoint Conference North America. Definitely check out the special SPC 18 recap podcast we produced and published from and during the event.
But we've got some specific news and announcements that we wanted to cover beyond what we shared at the SharePoint conference. And the first one that I wanted to share was the ability to connect an existing SharePoint team site to a new Office 365 group. And we're rolling this one out in a couple of phases. We started one phase for admins where they could go run a PowerShell command against a site to automatically connect it to an Office 365 group. The second phase will actually bring that power to the users or the site owners to actually be able to do that, to go up into the site gear icon and choose connect to a new Office 365 group. And essentially what that does, it kicks off the job to go create a new Azure AD object, a list of members essentially, which is the Office 365 group. And then it pulls in that existing team site, modernizes it as much as possible, which is primarily lists, libraries, and homepage. And then, of course, connects it to other apps that get provisioned, like a shared inbox, a planner plan, those kind of things. So phase 2 is coming very soon, and phase 1 is kicked off. So if people have the need to connect an existing SharePoint team site to a new Office 365 group, you can do that and get started today. We've got some new planner integration, and we actually showcased this for the first time at the SharePoint conference, coming very soon.
I've been planning on that one for a while.
Oh, yeah? Has it been a task on your Taskmaster?
It's been something I've been meaning to do.
Wow. Okay, so we've just blended all of our projects. So let me bring project back online and take this into the new planner integration that we have in the SharePoint team site. So planner integration today, I should say previously, we had a planner web part that was really nice. You could add a planner experience to a page. Now you can actually have a full page experience of planner, and it's really easy to bring in an existing plan or to create a new plan right from SharePoint. Same as you go to click New Document, now you can click New Plan and either pull in an existing plan or create a new one and start adding your tasks and assigning people to the tasks. And you can do that right in line with SharePoint. You actually don't have to go out to Planner. But if you've done work in Planner and you want to bring that into a SharePoint experience, think of it now as a full page experience, not just a web part or a zone of a page. Last thing I wanted to talk about, two pretty simple web parts, but I think the one is pretty important. One is the new weather web part. So you can drop this anywhere on a page. We think this will get used at a more parent level, like a hub site homepage or a communication site homepage, to indicate essentially what the weather is in the place where this information takes place.
The more that SharePoint is the centerpiece of all of that corporate information and organizational collaboration, anytime we know that you have to leave context, go somewhere else to look for something else, there's a substantial percentage of the time you never get back to being on task. So the more that we can enrich that experience, the more likely you are to stay in context and stay productive.
I agree. And to be honest, even something as simple as a weather web part is a very common thing that people have built themselves and put on their portals of the past. And certainly in a more modern way, now you can drop the web part on any page, even in a news article, to essentially present that to the end user. And everybody always loves, what's the weather today? Maybe I want to go outside and look for myself, or maybe SharePoint can tell me. The other web part that we really are introducing an update to is the image web part. Now you can have images with text overlay, and also you can provide a hyperlink so that when you click on the image, if you're a consumer of the page, that would actually take you somewhere. That was a pretty often requested feature for the image web part, and now those are in. So those, all that I mentioned, are coming soon, or if not already there.
It's interesting. So kind of pivoting from that, one of the things that we showed at SharePoint Conference is how cognitive services works with image content throughout Office 365. One thing that people hadn't realized, and you can already check this out now, is if you upload an image, there's three things that we can always try to do for you. We can recognize objects in it, common ones like a flag. Is this outdoors? Is this a receipt? Is this a whiteboard? Are there people in this? We can also tell you where that picture was taken from the geocodes inside of it, and we can look for any text and extract all of those as columns in your SharePoint library so you can use it for additional search or to automate other things and conditions that might be happening there. Closely tied to that is what we can do with any text in SharePoint through cognitive services, and that's usually wired up with Flow. So I can look at a text stream, pass it into cognitive services using Flow, and get sentiment analysis back so I can see how well I'm doing.
A lot of times when people bring in content, photos, information into SharePoint, right, it has been the requirement for people to automatically layer in a ton of metadata, which is a lot of work to ask an end user to type in more information about an object or about a piece of information. And now, of course, with images, you'll be able to get a lot of that for free based on what the machine on the back end is actually doing for you.
And one of the things that we showcased in the keynote, and I'd encourage you to take a look at that for lots of topics, was how to build a custom model to go in and process. And the example we used is how do we teach the cloud to recognize the distinction between our old corporate logo and our new corporate logo. So if you have a large volume of pictures, you can automatically recognize those. The line that I forgot to use in the keynote, said here for the first time ever, is, and if I can build a model, you can build a model.
Wow, that really was amazing.
Yeah, I'm glad. Were you waiting?
I really was.
But we were also talking about what you can do with text. And the text capabilities that we have, you can process any text for not just sentiment, but for key phrases, for moderation, as well as for translation. So, and those are all things that are available now.
So I mentioned two web parts, two that I manage. You also manage a pretty important web part that's starting to make its way in. We showcased it a while ago, but now as far as for customer use, talk about the Power Apps web part.
Sure. Well, the Power Apps web part allows me to take any Power App, regardless of what the data source is, if it's connecting to Dynamics or Salesforce or Google or what have you, and be able to bring that entire application experience directly onto a SharePoint page. Lots of organizations need to integrate many, many, many systems. Power Apps is a great rapid way to build an app that sits in front of it. And now you can integrate that entirely into the page experience without having to move the data. A lot of people ask, if I have information that lives in Salesforce, for example, do I need to bring all that into a SharePoint list to integrate it into SharePoint? And the nice answer is, now you don't.
So there's a lot of ways where people can actually either build off of or use Power Apps. We introduced the ability to kind of take over the new form when you click a new item and have that be a nice, rich experience. But this is actually embedding a full web app. I know that's maybe not the right way to say it, but an application that you build in Power Apps into the page, not just the new experience, but anywhere you want. Lay out your page, add a document, add a video, add a whatever, and then plop your Power App right there in the context with what you want to communicate out and collect from your users.
Right, and there have been some workarounds where you can accomplish something similar, but we've seen a lot of organizations in particular that have field service and customer support operations. In the field, someone has a tablet-based Power App where they can look and see everything that's going on with inspections or customer service out there on the road, part of our first line promise to our customers. But then for folks who are sitting inside a call center, it doesn't make sense when someone calls in for them to then, hang on, let me take out my iPad and look up the app and see what our field tech is seeing. You can embed that entire experience right on the page along with FAQ, and it becomes a really valuable resource to be able to provide inline customer service.
Thinking of the topic this week, the desktop diet, it reminds me as if a desktop client Office was talking to Office Online in the browser, and it sings this little song. Anything you can do, I can do better.
I can do anything better than you.
Ooh, I wasn't sure if you were going to join me, but I'm so glad that you did. Imagine that. What maybe started in the past as kind of a lighter weight version of is now a really rich version, especially when you think of different scenarios and, of course, different specific type of people. Just to talk in terms of how we sell and who we sell to, there's a very specific type of worker, somebody who isn't always at their desk. And we now call them the first-line worker, and it's actually a SKU that you can buy for Office 365. But we wanted to pick that apart and really start to talk about what does that mean for us when we take the desktop diet, or sometimes by nature of where we're at, are on the desktop diet.
First-line workers are not a unique group of people, but at some way, shape, or form, every one of us in the course of a typical work week is a first-line worker for at least part of that time.
Yeah, and I think the part where it really lands the most is it used to be this concept of they have a shared computer. One person logs in, they log out, the next person logs in. And that's probably very common. It's not uncommon that is part of the scenario. But the other computer that we all have, which I think really emphasizes what you just said, is our mobile device.
Right.
You tell us, what mobile device do you have? A nice 4-inch phone? You've got maybe a 10-inch tablet, something that you take with you or have with you most often.
A 38-inch Surface Studio.
And the Surface Hub
That's not a product yet, folks.
So, but imagine, everybody's got their device, and it's not just how do I access through the mobile browser, but there's also applications. Of course, there's the SharePoint app. We've talked about that. There's also, of course, the Teams app, and everybody's got ubiquitous email. So there is, what is that experience? A, do they get it? That's based on something that is approved by IT, but flexible for end-user use. And that's the reality. And we sort of challenged ourselves, Chris and I, for a number of days to go on the desktop diet. Essentially, don't use the Office clients on the desktop and get work done strictly through the browser or mobile. And so how was your diet?
It was good. I had to be pretty selective about when I went on it and off it, to be fair. Mm-hmm. So over the past month, as we've been getting ready for SharePoint Conference and a couple of other things, but I picked a 2-day window when I had a lot of work in and around campus, running back and forth between our building and the engineering building here, as well as a day when I was traveling back to Cambridge, Massachusetts, to talk to a number of biopharmaceutical companies about what they're doing with compliance and content management. And I found that I never really missed needing to log in to a tablet or to a laptop for the day. So a second part of it was being able to get access to information that already lives inside SharePoint. And so for my meeting, one of the things I was able to do at a meeting, or to be fair, I just brought my phone to the meeting. And we thought it was only going to be discussions, but someone asked me a question, and I said, well, I do have a PowerPoint file that covers this, and I was able to go into the OneDrive mobile application, look it up, reshare it to someone who then projected it on screen. Nice.
Yeah, and just to add to that a little bit, one of the things I think we take a little bit for granted is SharePoint is always browser-based. Like, we've been knocking that thing left and right just to make sure that it loads up great on PCs and Macs, Safari, Chrome, IE, Edge, lots of testing, lots of experiences, removal of some of the legacy things like ActiveX to make sure that it's a great experience. And, of course, that tailors down into the mobile browser. But SharePoint has always been kind of a diet in the sense of how you access it. It's easy to access.
Right.
It's gluten-free by default, right? But of course, we've been talking about the SharePoint mobile app. One of the things that I actually took the most advantage of on this diet experience and experiment was Outlook. So Outlook for the web app, the correlation that I made was, of course, SharePoint, if you think about, desktop and mobile and whatnot. But if you think about that connection between server and service, SharePoint's been making a ton of advancements in Office 365 as a service. And I think the same thing is true if you look at what the Outlook team has been doing. The Outlook desktop client is feature-rich, and it's amazing. And certainly, I hate to admit, sometimes that's where I live. But to turn to the Outlook web app, to obviously take on this experiment, was a real breath of fresh air, because there are two things that really jumped out at me. And these aren't high-end features or anything like that, but previews of documents that were connected was easier. I didn't have to click anything. I could actually a little bit more see what those attachments were, or a preview of a news article. Those came through, and they've done that work in the Outlook web app. The other area for me that just maybe is, again, more of an experience is I never felt like I was downloading my email to then view it.
Right.
I log in, Outlook web app, and it's just there. My mail is just there. It just seemed a little bit faster. Did you feel like this was a new thing going on a desktop diet, or it was just a reminder that actually you are, productive in this way because you're on your mobile device often, or when you're in the browser, whether it's SharePoint or SharePoint maybe will take you into other experiences, or the other way around with all the integration work with Yammer and Teams and Stream, to bring together through the web experiences that are meant to be more connected, so you're not hopping from app to app. Yeah, I found that a lot of that is just already there. Whether you try to take the diet or not, it is how we're working more and more.
Well, what's interesting is one of the patterns that I discovered on the desktop diet have actually persisted post-diet, and that is how content gets authored. One of the things that I have to do, as you do as well in the course of our jobs, is being able to speak and present to people. And some of those presentations, as natural as they look, are actually scripted. Mobile devices are great as consumers, but because of the form factor, they're not always the best places to go write a PowerPoint presentation. They're harder devices to use for creativity. But one of the things that I found is that if I use Outlook Mobile, and if I have to script something, and I want it to sound conversational, and I write an email to myself and just use voice recognition, and just sit there and go on, each couple of paragraphs will be another email, I can then, when I do get back to a desktop, take all of that voice recognition text, reformat it, paste it into where I need it to go in the script. I was doing that for something else, and I found that was really useful for me getting ready for SharePoint conference, to the point that I would be sitting at home with my laptop in front of me, but was still using Outlook Mobile to dictate. So I had a conversational approach to it. So that was one of the real takeaways that I took from it, and I was glad that I did it.
That's good. The only time that I kind of hopped off the diet, and it was more because I just felt like a late-night snack, or I just got a little munchy hungry or something, was when I actually needed to copy-paste slides from other decks that I had already presented, or other versions that people had used. We had one of the decks that our manager, Dan Holm, put together for all of us, was a set of common slides. If you're going to talk about this, please use this latest version. And so we kind of created our own slide library, if you will.
Right.
And it was the only moment.
Bad word. Don't bring it up.
I know. We'll get in a little
First
trouble.
rule of slide libraries. Don't talk about slide libraries.
All right. Well, the concept obviously was there. Here is a unique set of slides that we want people to, when they're talking about something like inner loop, outer loop, there's now kind of an official version of that. And that was the only time that I really wanted to, across 3 or 4 presentations, bring it into the presentation that I was working on. Where I took the most advantage of being on the diet was when people wanted me to review their presentations, of which I did about 5 or 6 main ones that I would own for my workload. And then I just took a peek at, the keynote and how that was going, and what was Jeff, realigning for his presentation. And those were just one click, load in the browser, see what I need to see, get a sense of what somebody was thinking or working on, and then providing my comments directly back to them right in the browser. I never have to download the PowerPoint. I never have to worry about uploading a different version. This is the one with Mark's comments or whatever. One single source of truth, but all very accessible and doable through the browser. I think it's very workable, and I think, we didn't necessarily need to go on the diet to know that the diet was beneficial. But one of the ways that I like to think about it, after gone just through a couple of days, is there really is no installation necessary. It's like never waiting for the cable person to come and hook up your home. It just works, and it's super accessible across whatever way that you enter it.
Well, 2 things I'd recommend. If you haven't tried it, you absolutely should try this, for those of you listening at home or in your car or at the office. The second is, even if you're coming to this from a SharePoint purist's perspective, really spend some time with the OneDrive mobile app, because the OneDrive mobile app has also made tremendous strides. I'd encourage you to take a look at our announcements from SharePoint conference there, for being able to scan documents in and work with them and share them and find them. And it's not limited to just what you might think of as your personal OneDrive, but it gives you immediate access to find and sync information across all of your SharePoint sites as well, and be able to make sure you always have a copy of those with you on the go.
So with the first-line worker, I thought maybe we could just wrap up a segment here, talk a little bit about some of our customers. With the first-line workers, of course, these are people that are behind the counter, on the phone, in clinics, on the shop floor, and there are about 2 billion people worldwide that would officially qualify for the desktop diet. They're already on it, and this is the way that their company is purchasing on their behalf.
So, Mark, I know you've done some research on this. I'd love to hear, what are some examples of customers who have been tremendously successful with that pattern?
Yeah. So one of them is Lowe's, the home improvement specialist. And their first-line workforce is pretty plentiful in terms of, think about you go into a Lowe's and you see people behind the cash register, people on the floor ready to answer your questions. And most importantly, they're ready to help you with your own ideas and how to make those come to fruition. So they're not behind a computer all day, but they're on the floor. They do have their mobile device, and they're empowered by Lowe's to access things like, you just said, OneDrive for Business. They instant message each other oftentimes if they have a question or they want to pose some feedback to somebody directly. And they think about these ways of using OneDrive, SharePoint. They have a place where they can go and log in and share their ideas broadly. But one of the things that I thought was just a unique case that helps hit home is a lot of times a customer will come in and they've got a picture on their phone and they wanted help with how to make that space or that backyard area or something, change it from A to B to make it look nicer, and they needed to come and get some ideas. So they actually start that ideation by sending that photo to the person they're talking to in the store, and that might be over email. But ultimately where they store that is in their OneDrive, and part of their limitation before being enabled was, where do I put it, and do I actually have space enough to put it? So with everybody who's a first-line worker in terms of how we would give them services through Office 365, they get a OneDrive. So the people will email their ideas, and they store it in OneDrive, and then they can reference that as they continue that conversation. It's not just a one-time operation in the store. So I thought it was really empowering, and how not only does the case study showcase that, and we'll put the link to the Lowe's case study, but it really speaks to a specific scenario and how they can work with those documents, and specifically images, which are sometimes a little tricky. So just in terms of wrapping up on Lowe's, a quote from Justin Litherland, who is their vice president of IT stores. Our first-line workers co-author and share documents in OneDrive, and they can collaborate on the same file at the same time, knowing that their changes will sync and that they'll always be working on the latest version. To be frank, that's pretty straightforward when you think of the value prop of OneDrive. But when you put that into the hands of somebody who maybe doesn't have that own computer or just isn't at their desk often, that's invaluable. And really to hear them say that, I think is a testament to, how they can empower them to have the tools that they need to get the work done. And as they would say, the more that they can understand their customers and bring their dreams to life, the more they're going to love where they live.
That's great. So that's your first-line story, but not your last.
No, the second time first-line story is with a little bit of a different type of customer, a customer who's actually has a set of people that are veterinarians and their staff. And the company is called VCA, Venice Boulevard Animal Hospital, where they're caring for pets and their people too. And they have one of the best names for an intranet site that I could ever imagine. Being a dog fan, I actually have a cat, but I go to the dog park often, and I love to get my good pets and jowl itchings and scratchings in. Their intranet is called Woof Connect. And this is where everybody throughout the hospital, not just people who are administrators, but of course the doctors, veterinarians, and their staff, have one place to go and connect on a SharePoint-based intranet. And they've built this site in connection with Yammer, and they connect directly through and off of that site through instant messaging. So if people have a question to a doctor or have a comment about a pet that had come in and they wanted to get the answers quickly, they use that to go to the intranet, ask their questions, and they basically have a one-stop shop that they can use to connect with each other, share documents, and establish best practices. And again, in the medical profession, imagine these folks are on their feet all day with a ton of different pets. Certainly, they've got their own processes for taking notes and information to always retain information about the pets in a recurring fashion. But in a reactive way, they're able to just log into a browser, find out what they need, ask their questions, and get work done. So we'll put links into all of this in terms of the specific customers that we talked about with Lowe's and VCA. But a lot of great examples even beyond that. We'll put a link out to our customer success website where you can go and read a ton of great case studies. All right, so I think it's time to dive behind the screens, maybe behind the browser, with this topic, to go a little bit behind with the team that's building a lot of what people experience when they go desktop diet or when they don't have any apps, really. Everything's through the browser. And so we're joined today with Mike Morton, Partner Group Program Manager on the team, on the engineering team, and Dan Consternaro. Did I pronounce that right? Costanero. Principal Program Manager, which means...
That means I work with people on our team.
You're a people manager. That's what I thought. I just love that it's manager. Manager squared. Maybe
we love it too.
We'll put it in the show notes as manager squared. But we invited you guys in because the topic, but certainly where you focus is Office Online. And I'm going to let you describe a little bit more about that. But when we think of Office Online, and certainly from the SharePoint side of things, sometimes it is. I'm looking at a document. But I think also it's in search results. You're using the Office Online for previews. And when you're embedding it in various places, maybe news article or a web page, it's that experience. So you probably have a lot of touch points, not just SharePoint, right? And also thinking commercial and consumer.
That's right.
But first, just thanks for coming on the show and just give a sense of who you are. Mike Morton.
Yep, I'm really happy to be here. I am basically run the Office Online program management team. I don't have the title program manager, but I guess that would be the logical conclusion. But effectively, the engineering, the program management team for Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and OneNote Online. So those are the core sort of Office apps. I actually worked on SharePoint. I was one of the original program managers when SharePoint started back in 1999.
All right.
So I worked on SharePoint from 99 to 2007. So if you ask me deep SharePoint questions, I probably can't answer, but it's how it worked.
Let's ask a little, maybe a workhow manager question.
Whatever happened to the web clipping dashboard?
The web clipping dashboard. You're already asking me things that are too difficult.
Awesome. Well, before we dive into it, Dan, just a quick rundown of who you are. We know you're a manager of manager.
Right. Only two this time.
Only two.
Mike is three. Yes.
I understood.
Right. So I started at Microsoft in 2001. I worked on the Outlook team for a long time. And then I moved to work on Mike's team about 5-ish years ago. So the same at Word, Excel, PowerPoint, OneNote Online. Just the same versions you're used to running in the browser.
Awesome. I'm going to actually jump to my second question because now knowing that a little bit, my real first experience with anything what we call now Office Online was OWA, the Office Outlook web app. And I have it in here just as more of a tee-up for you, but you started us. That was the first time where I really was fooled by what was in the browser because the team who was given the demo, they had their browser full screen, they were showing Outlook web app, and they were just doing hey, here's what's new for Outlook. And then they pulled the rug out from under us and said, actually, you've been looking at Outlook web app. And it was really cool.
Yep.
But, okay, step back from that. I'm thankful for everything you do in Outlook web app because that saves me sometimes. But just curious, that history, just give us where did Office Online evolve and not just what was it called before, but really why did it come about?
Yeah, it is really interesting, actually, even starting with OWA, because that actually predates a lot of the web technologies for sort of really interactive web experiences. It used to be, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was very difficult to build a web application that resembled what we would have in sort of a typical sort of Windows app. And OWA was really one of the first. One of sort of the interesting stories is we actually had a memo and I think it was about 2005, written by Steven Sinofsky. He used to run Office, talking about, at the time he used the term Office Web Companions. But he basically said, hey, we're going to build web-based versions of Office apps, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, even OneNote at that time. And it ended up we didn't start working on it until about 2 or 3 years later. But it actually predates a lot of the competition. So if you look at all the sort of the various experiences out there, and there are a lot of web productivity solutions today, the actual premise of it is well before the competition. And so it's really a belief about having Office everywhere. And mail was kind of an inspiration. The idea was, even at that time, the idea that you couldn't get to your mail anywhere, that you'd have to be on your Win32 desktop, that you couldn't get to it from any machine with a browser or any even mobile phone. We said, hey, we want to have that same concept for Office, right? The idea that your Office documents would be locked in one place and that you couldn't get them from wherever you were, just didn't make sense to us. And of course, SharePoint is a key part of that, right? In order for us to have those documents available anywhere, the documents can't be on your hard drive. They have to be up there in the cloud. And so the real vision was sort of universal access, being able to get to your documents, be able to share, collaborate, work together. And that started actually quite a while ago. The engineering effort started a little bit after that, but really the inspiration has got pretty deep roots in the Office organization.
So you might have joined after?
Yes.
Or so just from maybe the 5 years ago, if you jump from where we started and we'll get to where we are, what's that middle ground, when we hit some of those inflection points of maybe not just companion, but the tool that people are actually going to really use day to day?
Right. So when I joined the team, Mike was kind of giving me the run through. Thank you. The run through.
We'll touch on the run around later.
Excellent. Here's where we're at, and we're at this inflection point where for a long time, we've called them the Office Web Companions because we felt that they're a good supplement to running Office. Mm-hmm. We kind of want to turn a corner and say, you could be fully productive in the web if you wanted to. And of course, Office, the Win32 clients are very rich, and they've been around for a long time, and people really love them. But there was a growing number of people who wanted to just work in the web. And like, hey, I just want to be productive. And so that's kind of how OWA was inspired as well. Like, hey, we know that there will be a lot of people on the planet that will never want to leave using Win32 Outlook. But there are some people who are pretty happy with just booting a browser. And so that's kind of when I joined the team. We switched from the word companion to apps. And so we call them the Office Web Apps. Mm-hmm. And then later we renamed it Office Online to sort of reflect that it's in the cloud. And people they thought app, and they thought, oh, I'm going to install this on my phone. Like, oh, no, that's not what we meant. We just meant it's like real and not just a companion. So, and we're still struggling a little bit with the name because Office Online kind of sounds like Office 365, kind of sounds like a lot of the same things. Yeah. But when you say Word in the cloud, people are like, oh, like in a browser. Yeah, that's it. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting talking about that inflection. I remember about 6 years ago, before I joined Microsoft, I was an MVP, I was CTO at Dell, and I wrote an article about a projection that at some point in the future, we're not going to be talking about Office 365 as a limiting factor, but about the things that you can do exclusively or better in a cloud-based implementation than you can do in traditional on-premises environments. Kind of projecting forward, when you look at that core trio, especially Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, do you see that as an eventual end state for where those applications go?
Yeah, absolutely. The cloud is really transformational. When we think about taking the apps forward, traditionally Office has been about productivity. We've made it really great to make beautiful, professional-looking documents, and of course that remains a core value proposition. But when you think going forward, I'll pick sort of two areas. One is sort of teamwork, and the second is intelligence. A foundation of teamwork is having everybody being able to work on the same document. So basics like real-time co-authoring. But then more sophisticated things like being able to say, hey, Dan, can you work on this section? Being able to mention somebody, having a really rich activity and version history so I can see who exactly changed which parts of my document. Maybe being able to share a document and say, hey, I only want Mike to add comments to this section, and I want Dan to have sort of full access rights. And so collaboration is kind of a key part. And then the second part is intelligence. We really want to make sure that we have services in the back end that really help you get your work done more efficiently. This can be everything from very basics, like helping you write and be more efficient by saying, hey, this terminology, if I try to say, we want to have somebody man the booth. We're like, oh, that's a gender-specific term. Maybe you want to say staff the booth to use, a term that's sort of more appropriate to far more sophisticated things. Like I have an Excel spreadsheet. We have intelligence in the cloud that can look at that spreadsheet and find anomalies, suggest, hey, you want to make this pivot table or pivot chart or these things that are more difficult. Having you actually find insights and learn and discover stuff based not just on rules, but true deep in machine learning.
And it's not just recommending it to them. Sometimes it's what used to be many clicks and configuration and knowledge is just a yes.
That's right.
Do that for me. And
Absolutely.
It just does it. That's great. So I know one of the things that you promote is that transition, if they are now apps, companion, online, and how you describe them as being compatible as far as, depending on whether you use one or the other or both. You talk about that easy transition. And I know just generally, if I move from online to the desktop, I usually think of I know why, I know when, but talk about maybe the technical side of it, when somebody transitions, what that means and how you think about it. But then also we want to land on what are those scenarios when somebody can go just online and then maybe when they need the desktop, at least at this point in time.
Yeah, sure. So at a technical level, for starters, just performance and seamlessness is a key thing for us. We really want to make sure that people don't feel like they're having to make a choice. If they want to really quickly go to the clients, they don't have to debate, is it going to, some people actually even have a hard time understanding that the clients can work with documents in the cloud. Like they might be using the web, they think it's the most up-to-date, and it may seem obvious, and I suspect a lot of the listeners on this podcast, it's obvious, but a lot of the end users of companies still have a disconnection that they can use these sort of traditional rich clients live and directly against the cloud. And so the first part is we want to make it as seamless and as fast as possible. So when the user wants to go to the rich client, it feels, and we often use this term, alive and connected. That kind of inherently comes in our browser apps, where the browser sort of, people assume is connected because it's in the browser. But we want to have that same goal in the rich client. So people actually realize we've done even little small things like put save to SharePoint actually in the title bar in the Office apps. It sounds like such a small thing, but it's had a big impact on sort of usability for users. Your question about when, right now there is still no doubt that the rich clients are the native clients are the place with the most functionality. So if you're going to really try to create that sales deck with a fine-tuning of your animations and transitions and the box in the right place, or if you're finance and doing an Excel spreadsheet where you're really trying to calculate and do a lot of things, the rich clients are the place that you're going to have that transition. More and more, we're seeing people being able to do more, a lot of their core tasks in the web. But we think it's a real asset for us because you don't really have to make a choice. You can use the web, you can have sort of the ease of use of that, the great collaboration, and then when you need that power, we have it, hopefully quickly and seamlessly at the,
since you were talking about teamwork before, one thing, and granted, we're all for Microsoft, so we have a little bit of a selection bias.
Yep.
But, I've found that when we're really emphasizing teamwork, especially for co-authoring real-time collab in the same document, it's a better experience to be in the web. You can still do it, absolutely. Please, I'm not saying you can't do real-time co-authoring with the rich clients, but we found it to be a really, a preferred experience in many cases. If you think about how a lot of web experiences are, and it's sort of the modern world, is there sort of what I think of as the ESPN or the CNBC approach to user experience, and that there's a crawl over here, there's information that's popping up, we've got things coming. One thing I will always adore Word for is the ability to tune everything else and just have kind of a pure authoring experience where the focus is on the words. And as long as we keep that going, I'm a huge fan.
Yep. So we really like the scenario of I'm going to go to the place that I need to think, I'm going to click the button, and I'm going to get a space where I can type.
Right.
And I think Word, Excel, and PowerPoint Online excel at that. And so we find that that's a workflow that's pretty common, and especially when you have a shared space, like, you're going to go create this in a team, and there's a place where in Teams you can click new documents. I'm going to create this in a SharePoint site where we all know where our team site is. And then just that collecting feedback, I think you mentioned track changes. That'll be live very soon. So that'll be a scenario that you can do online as well.
Oh, excellent.
And like Mike was alluding to earlier, all those collaborative things where you just want to see what's changed over time and the history of what's going. So those are all scenarios that we feel are really, really feel great in the web.
So as many of the audiences may have seen during SharePoint conference, one of the things across the board we're trying to do with SharePoint is bringing kind of that unified file experience. We've seen it with things like the share dialog and all the places where we're lighting up all the metadata that we have about that. We've got this rich history of the changes and collaboration and what's happened since last you were in the file. Like, how do you see that intelligence being something that you can mine through the Office clients?
Yeah, no, absolutely. One of the core in fact, we have a lot of research that shows people don't collaborate on documents because they don't actually trust each other. It's not so much that they don't trust other people in that they think they're good people, is that they don't actually have faith that they're going to write things the way that they would write them or order things. And so really having very fine-grained activity is one of the big investments that we're making in Office. And so in the future, when you browse to a document, it'll actually say, hey, while you're away, John, Amy, and Nick made changes to this document. You can click on it, and it'll actually take you through and highlight and show Nick added this picture, John changed this table. And we find that's not just helpful for you reviewing and actually kind of tracking changes, but it actually helps John, Amy, and Nick feel more confident they can just go and directly edit that document, sort of building that sort of cultural trust. And SharePoint's the key. SharePoint is the activity store in the back end that's actually storing all that data. And kind of your point on the workflow, really starting in the cloud is the key, right? Classically, some people might have started on their local hard drive, work on it, and then publish it up in the cloud. In the future, we sort of see, hey, if you actually want to work against your hard drive locally, it'll be like, error, are you sure you want to work locally, right? We want to say the default behavior is everything. You just click File New, it's in the cloud. Unless you have some very specific reason, that's how you work, because it really enables these great collaboration scenarios.
I keep my desktop itself is a OneDrive synchronized folder, so it's impossible
Good job,
to be away
Chris.
from the cloud.
Small clap for Chris.
Yeah.
Well, one of the personas I know that you guys probably live and breathe is what we used to call the kiosk worker, and now in reference, it's just F1, which stands for first line worker. When you're building for that persona, and maybe when you're building for sort of halftime Mark and Chris when we start in the browser, but we might have some scenarios where we move to the desktop, how do you think about F1? How do you think about that first line worker?
Yeah, for sure. So in many cases, the first line worker, for starters, they won't have access to the native clients. And so there you really have to make sure about having the online versions really do the end-to-end scenarios that they need. When we first started researching it, we thought, a lot of these scenarios, it might be like a barista at a coffee shop or a retail employee at a big box store. How complicated could their scenarios be? And it actually turns out that these first-line workers really do real work. There are cases where they might get a brochure from headquarters, and the brochure might be generic, but they might update it with the local specials and the things that are actually part of that area. And so they're actually editing Word documents that might have tables and pictures and layouts and sort of complicated parts. And so we really are making sure that we're a great experience for them. But simplicity is really the key. In a lot of these cases, they're not trained knowledge workers. Their main job might be something else. And so we're really focusing on making it as easy and fast for them to use it as possible.
So do you come across not just a single persona, but a variety of personas?
Definitely.
When you're thinking across the various apps or the collection of, when they think of, this is my Office suite in the browser, what are maybe some variances when you think about the different tools or the different type of people?
Sure. Well, we get a lot of data and a lot of input from people who use the product, and it varies quite wildly. What people think is just table stakes. I can't believe you didn't include A, or I can't believe you didn't include B. And you talk to a different group of people, and they don't even think about A and B, and they talk about C and D. And so the normalization of that is complicated. But a lot of things tend to be, the basics of copy-paste has to work flawlessly with any kind of content from anywhere, everywhere. And so there's a couple of things like that we can normalize across all people and all the way that they use the product, that we say, this has to be excellent. And then there's just scenarios that we can unlock where you say, there's somebody who, like Mike was referring to, is going to edit a very complex document that has a bunch of layout. We'd say, well, the layout's really challenging for us to get perfect because there's a lot of code in Word we have to replicate in JavaScript. But if we can render that pretty close for a frontline worker, they don't really care as much. They're like, okay, the text is correct. Now, if you were going to look at that from a copy editing perspective, that person would use Word for it. And so it tends to be when you get the superpowers of Office that have been built over many decades, those things are tending to be the things that people want to reach for the clients. But if you're just doing some quick edits, if you're just updating something quick, if you just want to throw something on a sheet like you were talking about before, I'm going to write a blog post. Like, it doesn't really matter if it's formatted perfectly. What matters is you have the heading sections right, and people can type in the middle, and the bullets work. And so we find that those scenarios are normalizing. And so when you get to a superpower of formatting or a superpower of some of the Office tricks that you've been using for 20 years to get it to look exactly a certain way, people will reach for the clients for those.
Well, I think it's nice is you're doing a lot of work with some of the intelligence and some of the sort of auto it does it for you. You just really are focused on, this is the text, this is the sentence, this is the image, and then do some magic. But now that you're embedding in Microsoft Teams, you're embedding in news and pages and SharePoint, you're in search results, again, consumer, commercial. One question before we turn into maybe the roadmap that was just announced at the SharePoint conference. What do you do from a scale perspective? Scaling that for the world, different than telling somebody, IT pro, here's how you scale it on premises. How has that evolved and maybe the unique challenges it presents?
Yeah, there are a couple parts of scaling. For starters, there's actually scaling the app experience. You just talked about the experience, within the context of things like Teams and OA. And there we're actually doing things to make it possible. One of the big investments that we talked about at the SharePoint conference is actually minimizing some of the Chrome of our UI and having the collaboration stuff take more center stage and having some of the commanding take less, which is really critical if you're going to be in a place like Teams, making sure the experience is coherent to the user. Then you can talk about scaling on the back end. We've worked really hard to make sure that our service takes advantage of Azure and a lot of the great worldwide scale out of our capabilities. And so when we say Office Online everywhere, we mean that in a lot of ways. We mean that against a bunch of different hosts. So when we talk about hosts, we talk about things like SharePoint and OneDrive, but there's also Exchange in Teams, in Yammer. As first party, we have third-party deals. We won't talk about some of them in this particular audience, but we have, wherever customers are, Office is sort of part of that. Even think about other geographies. We have partners with, companies in China and Russia and other locations that have sort of different sort of local competitors and so those kind of regions. So our goal is to really make sure that Office is a ubiquitous tool that people can count on and can share and can say, hey, no matter who I work with, I know they can use the latest version of Office.
Awesome. So you mentioned the SharePoint conference. Certainly there was a lot that we all shared there, but just to give it kind of a narrow focus in a specific to this episode, what were some of the things that you shared that you maybe can give us the highlights on?
Yeah, I think the key message that we want to get is Office 365, and particularly Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, are not just versions that you can are always up to date, are working against on-premises servers. They really are a way of changing how you actually work. And so the gist is, if you're using Word, Excel, and PowerPoint like you did 10 years ago, you're not getting the most out of Office. And we talked a bunch at the SharePoint conference of what that means. It means working in public. It means having your documents always in the cloud. It's democratization of information, having it easy to find other information. It's sharing. It's having more network decision making as opposed to hierarchical decision making. And these sound like sort of big foofy terms, but at the conference we really try to give concrete examples of how we're seeing companies really transform their corporate culture, how they actually get things done. And so it's not just they have this new tool to get things done a little bit faster. It's their entire way of doing work. Instead of having meetings, they real-time co-author, or even in a meeting, instead of it being the place where they decide to do work later, they actually do the work in the meeting. And so that's kind of the big message, which says, hey, we want you to really look at Office with a new lens. It's actually, in a lot of ways, it's familiar. It can do the same things that you could before, but it can really actually transform your corporate culture and actually really make you more competitive in today's environment.
We want to thank you, obviously, for your time to come in here today, but I think more to thank you for the work that you're doing, because the way that it complements SharePoint, for the things that get Kristen up in the morning in terms of our work, pays off, because in terms of people working with their documents, sharing them, and the experience of no matter who you send it to, you'll be able to know that they can see it, work on it, share it if they need to further beyond that. So that's really great, and I thank you for your work. But thank you for your time. We do have one segment at the end that we call Frequently Asked Questions, and I hope that you can stay around, and we'll do that a little bit later in the show. But thank you for your time today.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. Thanks.
Each week, there are, of course, a ton of interesting articles, reports, and apps that are out there. And we try to comb over everything that's out there and put it in context, specifically what we're talking about, or sometimes just a random app or best practice.
And if it's random, it's probably coming from me.
So I'll kick us off. There was an on-topic article that I came across from Forbes. This is from January 2018. And the title of the article is 6 Challenges of Empowering First-Line Workers and How to Overcome Them. And we'll put the link into the show notes. But the thing that I thought was really interesting here wasn't so much what can the first-line worker do with the technology. You have X technology or you bought X service, and now you can do that. But what I really liked was it level set what it is that people who are first-line workers, what they actually have to think about and what is a little bit different of why we even have that term. So when I look at this article, I first just wanted to highlight one of the quotes, and it'll give you a sense of why this article is a little bit different. The quote is, "The bottom line is that there are few, if any, technological barriers to digitally empowering today's first-line workers. Rather, organizational issues are the obstacles that need to be addressed." And so I boiled that down, and why I thought this was an interesting read is that boiled down to training and willingness for the enterprise to essentially tap into these important resources. These first-line workers are talking with customers every day. They're meeting with dogs and cats and, of course, their owners, like we talked about with VCA. And if you don't have a way to reach out to them and get their mind share and bring that back and refine how your business does business, I think then you're missing a huge opportunity. And typically, not only does the technology help them connect, but it gives them a way to participate proactively. And so I think before, if you read this article, it really highlights that ability to take what was a disconnected past of people from back office to front office to now a much more connected workplace.
So I'm looking at mobile technology well beyond even the surface of Earth. And I saw an article a couple of weeks ago in the New York Times that really captivated me. It's about how NASA is taking a classic technology and reapplying it to mobility on the surface of Mars. So the Mars 2020 expedition, which will be going up in a couple of years, will contain rovers, the same as we've seen before on missions like Sojourner and Pathfinder, but they're also going to send a small robot helicopter. They have to engineer it carefully because it's obviously in a different environment, but to be able to look at things from a different dimension, being able to use a classic technology that hadn't occurred to them before, and finding new applications for it, I think, is something that it's fascinating to see what NASA's going to be able to get to it. I know we all love to see those pictures when they come streaming in, but I think it's a useful model for how we think about reinventing technology in the mobile era.
Excellent. So to outer space and beyond.
To outer space and beyond, and for more details, we'll have the link to the article in those show notes as well.
We're here at the SharePoint Conference, 18 Nevada, Las Vegas, and we are getting some nice time here with Jason Himmelstein from Rackspace.
Yes, sir.
Jason, tell us a little bit about yourself.
As you said, my name is Jason Himmelstein. I am the Director of Technical Strategy and Strategic Partnerships at Rackspace. I've been there for about 3 years.
Why don't you tell our audience a little bit about what Rackspace does?
I can do that as well. So we are an MSP, a managed service provider, as well as a CSP provider, selling licenses as well. So we pair all of that up, and my space specifically is around the Office 365 world. But Rackspace, for a very long time, had been a hosting company. Prior to when Microsoft got into the game and Amazon got into the game, and then we kind of saw the changes happening, and we completely shifted about 3 years ago when I started from only on our gear to happy to do it on everybody else's gear. So we manage on the best clouds. So we manage on our cloud. We manage on Azure, on AWS, Google, and Alibaba at this point. I think there's one other. I always forget the other. There's some other cloud out there that I never remember the name of.
So let's chat a little bit about SPC. So how's the week for you? What are you doing here?
This has been a great week so far. I've been involved in this conference for a while now. I'm the IT Pro Track Chair. I'm responsible for the running of the Podcast Center, which we're sitting in right now on the Expo Hall floor, which is, we're getting the information out there from the show live, which is really exciting. So for me, as much as getting the IT Pro side of the tracks all set up, this has been a lot of fun.
Take us through an episode of Bifocal. What's the common theme? What do you and John chat about?
So John and I talk about business intelligence. Specifically, Power BI is our main focus because we're both BI guys in the SharePoint space, and when Power BI came about, we quickly got into that. I started doing business intelligence when I was working for a defense contractor in New England, ended up writing a book about it, and that was in the SharePoint context specifically. And John and I met, it's been about six years ago, and about 2 years ago we decided to do a podcast, and then we paused for a little bit, and we just aired episode 50 yesterday.
Wow.
So
wow.
It's kind of cool. We talk all about the BI things that are happening in the Microsoft space, from the Power BI angle most of the time. But we were talking a lot about the SharePoint space yesterday, which is a lot of fun.
One of the things that I know from the history of Rackspace was you all at some point acquired SharePoint 911.
We did.
Which in my mind was just a ton of talented people came on board. And then I know they dispersed and did a lot different things after a number of years. They started as a training unit. But if you think about the talent that you have at Rackspace, what does that translate to what you offer your customers? You talked about sort of the components and the physical offerings, but when it comes to whether it's a services engagement or it's just people who are helping guide people in the right way, talk a little bit about that side of Rackspace.
Absolutely. So, the acquisition of SharePoint 911 was about 6 years ago now, I think it is. And as you said, brought with it a wealth of just amazing people. The well-known MVPs were only a third of the wealth of talent that came across with that.
You guys still have the waffle guy?
Oh, we still have that waffle guy. Randy is roaming around here somewhere. Randy Driscoll and I get to work together quite frequently. And he's awesome. But beyond the face that the people know, the talent that came across from the administrative side, really, really rich and deep, dramatically changed what Rackspace was doing at that point in time. And while a lot of folks have moved on since, because over the course of 6 years, there's attrition. It just happens in places. But the mark of those people is still felt. And, we still have a terrific team who does SharePoint administration, and we actually have built up, since I joined, an Office 365 capacity as well on top of all of it. Obviously, the main focus, because we were known for email more than we were known for SharePoint, because even though we were really known for SharePoint, email is a thing that Rackspace. We have our own email platform. We were the largest hosted Exchange provider outside of Microsoft. I think we still are, and as that is slowly starting to tail off and Office 365 becomes even more pervasive, we have a huge team. We actually have over 100 Office 365 MCSA certified rackers who do support.
Ooh, I like that term, rackers.
That's what we are.
Can I become a pseudo racker? Or
you can become a racker adjacent. I'll stand next to you. We'll be good.
So the interesting thing is, I've been to Rackspace headquarters, which is a converted former shopping mall. And they've kept enough of the shopping mall is still visible inside of the building. Like the big cafeteria space used to be the food court.
Ooh, I like that.
And I really appreciate any office building where you have the option of taking the stairs or taking the slide to get down to the first floor.
I bet on the loudspeaker, data center, aisle 5, data center, aisle 5.
Yes.
That's awesome.
It's an awesome place. We call it the Castle, and it's a lot of fun.
We obviously speak a lot about digital workplace, and we do some hardcore joint investment with companies like Steelcase to say, what physically does a digital workplace need to look like? And if you walk around the Castle, you see lots of different modalities and experiments for this is co-working space.
It is. We have lots of conference rooms that you can reserve, but even more spaces that you just sort of drop into. For a long time, we were box customers. When I joined this company, we were box customers, and last year, we actually converted from box to OneDrive.
All right.
So that was a migration that happened, and we have since acquired 3 companies, and we've now migrated at least one of those off of Box. One of them was already on OneDrive, but bringing everybody together into our own tenant. We are heavy Office 365 users, and a lot of our folks are mobile as well. So being able to live in the mobile apps has been an interesting thing also. Not perfect, I'll be honest. I ran into a problem just this morning where I was cursing up and down on some mobile sharing, but that's what user voice is there for.
That's right. And the whole team is here, so they certainly want to hear that.
I should talk to them, shouldn't I?
It has been, not that I'm counting, but 4 years and 2 months since we had SPC in Las Vegas. How's the conference? I mean, how are you finding the conference, in addition to having more Microsoft people than we know what to do with wandering around?
Yesterday, I stood behind the registration desk as the keynote opened, and just this wave of joy flooded over me watching the sea of humanity coming in.
So, Jason, we want to know how people can find you, and then we'll talk about how people can find out about Rackspace.
Absolutely.
Tell us about where people should go to find your work and follow you.
So you can go out to bifocal.show, and that's where the podcast is. That's where I'm doing more work right now than I am on my own personal blog. I did post some stuff recently about Teams and SharePoint, and that's at sharepointlonghorn.com. So those are the 2 places. You can find me on Twitter, Jace Him, Jasehim.
Jace Him.
All
right. And now Rackspace. If people want to learn a little bit more about you, the talented folks that you mentioned, how do they get engaged?
You can always go out to rackspace.com, but if you specifically want to find out about our Office 365 offering, you can go out to o365.rackspace.com, and that'll take you right to our Office 365 offering, because we have a lot of stuff these days. As I said, we keep acquiring companies. Acquired one just last week. So, the integration of things in the digital space takes some time.
Is that what IoT stands for? The integration of things?
It does for me. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your time today. Chris, any final words for Jason?
Really appreciate everything you're doing with the community. I know we have a number of events coming up over coming months. What are some of the events that we can look for you in the second half of the year?
Go to Mainz, Germany. I'm going to be a part of the European Collaboration Summit, which is a sold-out event. It's going to be amazing. 1,500 attendees for that. Doing a BI workshop and a session with John. And then I'm going to be at SharePoint Saturday, New York. And then I will be at SP TechCon in Boston, SharePoint Fest in Seattle, and hopefully I get an opportunity to come out to Ignite as well. Great. So that's where I'm at so far.
So Jace Him coming to a event near you.
Yes, sir. Guys, thank you very much for the opportunity, for all that you're doing. I have heard great things about the show, and it's nice that people are getting to hear from you. Keep it up, and again, appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And now time for our frequently asked questions of the week, or FAQs. Each of us hears questions in the course of our day, week, or month at conferences, online, or through the Microsoft Tech community that seem to recur with frequency. Hence the name, Frequently Asked Questions. And hopefully with equal frequency, we can answer them here online. So Mark, I know you've had some FAQs of late about Microsoft Teams.
Yeah, the one that I've gotten that I wanted to call out here and make note of is, can I associate Microsoft Teams to an existing SharePoint team site? And this is sort of a timeline question. Microsoft Teams obviously came after SharePoint team sites have existed for a number of years in SharePoint Online. And we actually solved the first question that people had, can I connect an Office 365 group to SharePoint team site? And we answered that with what we're shipping now, with what I mentioned earlier. But specifically with Microsoft Teams, the answer is yes. And actually, there's a way that you've been able to do it for a number of months. And it's a part of what we've been talking about at the SharePoint conference as a new feature where it actually will save you a lot of time to actually make the association. So the key thing to remember is you don't lose your site. It becomes that same site that just gets connected to Microsoft Teams. Today you can do it. You come in through Microsoft Teams, and through a couple of clicks, you essentially are creating a new team and saying, yes, I already have what I need. I just need to connect the two. And there's about 3 or 4 clicks.
Right. So I guess the other version of that question that you're getting is, do I have to create a brand new site and move everything over to it to get those benefits?
No, definitely the clarity on that one is you already have your site, and that will be the one that gets connected to Microsoft Teams, and of course connected to all the other applications. The thing we announced at the SharePoint conference was now you'll be able to do that in one click from the site itself. So imagine I'm in a SharePoint team site, one that I've had for maybe 3 years, and maybe I first want to connect to an Office 365 group. You'll be able to do that. But I could also connect it to a Microsoft team. Right now, there'll be a button in the lower left of the team site where you just say, click to connect to Microsoft Teams, and it'll just do it in one click. But yes, you retain the same value of the site that you've had for, again, number of years, or if you just created new and you hadn't yet associated to it, it's a really easy step to take. So that's my FAQ. Chris, what's your FAQ this week?
So one question I've been getting a lot in the last month is, I see that Brand X has already achieved a certain level of certification in this or that compliance standard. And the one I've heard a lot is around FDA GXP compliance. When do you think Office 365 will be GXP compliant? My answer to that question is it already is and has been since 2014. So one of the things I really want to recommend people take a look at, if you have questions like those, take a look at the Office 365 Trust Center. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of certifications that we maintain. Our President and Chief Legal Officer, Brad Smith, has really set the standard for Microsoft to be at the forefront of the industry and pushing for the best security, privacy, and compliance for our customers, and making sure that we're setting a really sterling example of how this needs to be done in the cloud era.
All right, so Dan, we get a lot of questions. I expect that you get a lot of questions on a daily, weekly basis. What's your most frequently asked question recently? And of course, what's your answer?
Yeah, definitely. I very frequently get asked, when is feature X coming to Office Online? And one that I'm hearing a lot lately is, when is track changes coming to Word Online? And I'm happy to say that that's rolling out right now in production. You should see it in the next month or two. Cool. The other one I get asked a lot is, when I click a link to a document, why does it go to the viewer first and then I have to click edit? And I'm also happy to say that that's something we're working on. You should see that rolling out in production in the next few months as well.
So you're rolling out delight to all customers.
That's the goal.
Smiles everywhere.
Yep.
Excellent.
So, Mike, similarly, I know you speak to lots of customers on a weekly basis. What's been top of mind for them lately?
Yeah, often they ask, what is the future of Office Online? Are you guys committed, or are you really just trying to sell rich clients? And our story is absolutely. We really believe that Office Online, really Office across all the endpoints, whether it be Windows, the Mac, phone, are all sort of fundamental first-class endpoints. And our future is really a services-based future. That's what we're believing. We want customers to use Office 365. We want their documents to be in the cloud, be in OneDrive and SharePoint, using Teams. And whether they're using Office on Windows, using Office on the Mac, using Office on the web, in some ways we don't really care. We just want them using the latest and greatest versions of Office and against the cloud. And so our team's going to be working really, really hard to make sure that's a great experience no matter where you are.
Yep.
Great.
Excellent. And we're seeing that come true. I really, the time that you would have told me, yes, you will be able to edit efficiently a document on your 4-inch mobile device, I was laughing, but true. true. It happens a lot. Happens a lot.
So, Mike, Dan, thank you very much.
Thank you guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right, so that should be a great set of FAQs, and certainly anytime you get a frequently asked question, we want to help you answer it, and we'll have a way towards the end of the show so that you can communicate with us what's your question, what's your comment, and we'll certainly try to tackle those each episode. Let's talk about some upcoming events. We obviously just had the big one, SharePoint Conference, but there's always a lot of touch points for people to be able to come and learn and ask questions one-on-one, one to few, one to many. And so we've always got our SharePoint conferences. I wanted to call out a few from this point in time when this airs. There's SPS Warsaw, SPS Netherlands, and a first one ever in SPS Abidjan. And of course, always continuously down. Go to the SPS Events website. We'll have a link in our show notes. And you can see a very regional, very accessible SharePoint training near you.
Yeah, SPS, for those of you who aren't familiar, stands for SharePoint Saturday. So these are free community-sponsored events. The spsevents.org site has the details in all of them. And they're usually on Saturdays, but they're not exclusively SharePoint. They're really... they would call them O365 Saturdays if they could, but that's sort of a mouthful.
So we got three more to talk about. One is pretty local for where we are. We are here at the Redmond campus, and not too far across the water will be a SharePoint Fest Seattle, and that's August 20th through the 24th. So if you live in Seattle or want to travel down and over and up to Seattle, we'd love to have you. There's a great website that we'll have a link to.
And, the thing I recommend to customers about going to an event like a SharePoint Fest or an SP TechCon is Microsoft supports these, and there's usually a good representation from the product team. But the events don't have the 35,000 plus people that you would see at Ignite. So the ratio of attendees to Microsoft is much more favorable. So if you need FaceTime with someone like Mark or even someone like me, it's far easier to get that at one of our regional conferences.
Yeah, and same value with the MVPs who are, of course, all over the world and tackling all these problems, especially if you've got one that you haven't asked or didn't have, those couple of minutes to really articulate, here's my problem, can you help me solve it? Sometimes it goes beyond an FAQ and you really want to sit down with somebody. Or sometimes you just want to go and soak up a ton of presentations throughout a couple of days. So last one I think is near and dear to your heart as far as where you're technically from or have been coming from. SP TechCon Boston, that's August 26th through the 29th. Very similar to SP Fest Seattle in terms of the level of content, speakers, what you can expect, but obviously more regionally located if you're in the Northeast.
Right. It's always great to be able to not just hear from Microsoft, but from our MVPs and the rest of the community who can give sometimes a more balanced approach to how they integrate Microsoft technologies with third-party solutions.
And then the mother lode of conferences from Microsoft, a first-party event called Ignite 2018.
Ignite 2018, bring your walking shoes. It is a sprawling 30,000-plus technology conference that covers everything under the sun from Microsoft, SharePoint, and a few other technologies.
Pretty much all of Microsoft will be coming. If you have interest in Azure, SQL, Exchange, SharePoint, maybe even the Xbox team will show up. There are going to be a ton of product teams represented, but really there's just a ton of context of when I'm investing in Microsoft, I have a lot to learn. I have a lot of different groups within my organization that need to learn certain technologies. We're ready to roll out our mail and calendar. We want to put some people on some Exchange sessions. We want to roll out our intranet and think about what a modern intranet looks like. We're going to send them to SharePoint. Or we want to just build our apps at scale, and we need to understand a lot more what's going on in Azure. Ignite in Orlando, Florida, at the end of September is the place to be to get fluent and deep dive into everything Microsoft.
My favorite quote about Ignite came from a new Microsoft executive last year who went to Ignite for the first time, and she came back from it and realized what it is. She said, Ignite is basically Burning Man for SharePointers. So you can catch Mark and I hanging around the temple before we set flames to it in the last day.
But we will be more clothed than maybe the standard Burning Man person.
Gosh, I certainly hope so.
But yeah, great conference. Look for it in Orlando at the end of September 2018. Hope to see you there. So Chris, where should people go to find out more about you and review what it is you're doing currently?
Well, one of the best ways to get in touch with me is through my Twitter handle at cmcnulty2000. I'll also be anchoring our presence at the Digital Workplace Experience Conference coming up in Chicago, June 18th to 20th.
Similar to Chris, I'm pretty active on Twitter at mcashman with a K, MKASHMAN. And most of the articles that I publish go to the SharePoint community blog within the Microsoft Tech community.
Thank you to our guests, Jason Himmelstein from Rackspace, as well as Dan Costanaro and Mike Morton from Microsoft's online engineering team. Also, we'd love to encourage our listeners to send us your question for the SharePoint team. At many of our events, on campus and at conferences, we host a town hall where attendees can submit questions to have them answered by a council of people across engineering and product management. We'd love to do that here on air as well. So if you reach out to us through our email address, theintrozone@microsoft.com, or through Twitter, we'd love to arrange getting a voice memo and feature your question in an upcoming episode.
We mentioned a lot of things across the episode, and we'll certainly put all the links in our show notes. If you go to the podcast page at https://aka.ms/theintrozone, you'll always see show notes per episode. Just click into show more, and you'll see all the links to everything that we mentioned. Thanks so much for listening. We're your hosts, Mark Cashman and Chris McNulty. This has been The Introzone, a show about the SharePoint Intelligent Intranet. And follow us on Facebook at MS SharePoint and on Twitter at SharePoint. Also, we encourage you to send in your comments and questions for our SharePoint team and guests on the show. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcast, Stitcher, SoundCloud, or wherever you get your podcast. Thanks so much for listening. This has been The Introzone, a show about the SharePoint Intelligent Intranet.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous two-year contracts, they said, "What the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass?" So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/save.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.